Hey there. Tonight we start with something truly grim. You're about to step into the worn-out shoes of a medieval European slave. And honestly, you probably won't survive the first month of this life we're recreating together. So, before you drift off completely, like this video and subscribe, only if this kind of sleepy narration is your thing. And hey, drop a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is on your end. Now, kill the overhead lights and let's get into some history. The morning begins with confusion. You're still struggling to comprehend how quickly your life transformed. Just 3 days ago, you were a simple peasant tending to your small garden plot near the edge of your village. Your fingers still remember the feel of the soil, the familiar weight of the wooden hoe. The border tensions between your lord and the neighboring county had seemed distant, a problem for nobles and their soldiers. But then came the raid. Not a proper army, just a band of opportunistic men-at-arms taking advantage of the conflict. They swept through your settlement like a summer storm, fast and devastating. You weren't even worth killing. No, you were worth more alive, as a commodity to be traded. Your neighbors who fought back weren't so lucky. Their bodies were left where they fell, food for the ravens and a message to others. You remember being bound with rough hemp rope that bit into your wrists, leaving raw, bleeding marks that still haven't healed. The raiders didn't bother explaining anything. Why would they? You were just part of the plunder now, like the chickens they stuffed into sacks, or the iron cookware they loaded onto carts. At least the chickens were fed regularly on the journey. 3 days of walking, stumbling really, through unfamiliar woods and fields. Your captors spoke little, occasionally sharing a wineskin and laughing at jokes you couldn't hear. When you fell behind, the encouragement came in the form of a stick across your back. You quickly learned to keep pace despite your growing hunger and the blisters forming on your feet through worn-out leather shoes. By nightfall of the 3rd day, you arrived at a manor house, larger than anything in your village. This wasn't the home of your village lord, a minor knight with a fortified house. No, this was something grander, with stone walls and actual glass in some of the windows. Light from oil lamps spilled out into the courtyard as you were presented to a steward, a thin man with calculating eyes who examined you like a farmer might inspect a new goat. This one's strong enough for field work, he declared, barely glancing at your face, though not worth what you're asking. The haggling that followed was brief, but intense. You stood there, swaying slightly from exhaustion, as your value was determined in coins and goods. The final price seemed to disappoint your captors, but they accepted it nonetheless. Money changed hands. A document was produced, marked, and witnessed. Just like that, you became property. Medieval slavery wasn't like the later plantation slavery that would develop in the Americas. It was messier, less systematized, and sometimes blurred at the edges with serfdom and indentured servitude. But make no mistake, you are now legally a slave, a human tool. Medieval Europe never fully abandoned the institution of slavery, despite Christianity's uncomfortable relationship with it. The church fathers had written extensively about it, generally not condemning the practice outright, but urging masters to be kind and slaves to be obedient. Not that theological niceties matter much to you right now. What matters is that you're being led to a small outbuilding where other slaves and servants sleep. The smell hits you first, unwashed bodies, mildew, and the sharp tang of urine from the nearby waste pit. The building is little more than a long wooden structure with a dirt floor covered in straw. Bodies are already crowded together on this floor, some on thin pallets, others directly on the straw. Find a spot, grunts the guard who delivered you. Work begins before dawn. You collapse into a corner, your legs finally giving out after days of forced marching. Around you, faces turn briefly in your direction, hollow-eyed, curious, but not particularly sympathetic. New arrivals are common enough. Some will die in the first year. Others will adapt. All of them were once like you, stunned by the sudden descent into bondage. A boy, perhaps 12 years old, scoots closer to you. First day, he whispers. His accent marks him as being from far away, perhaps one of the Baltic regions. You nod, too exhausted for words. Eat this, he says, pressing a small piece of hard bread into your hand. Hide it quick before someone sees. You'll need strength tomorrow. This small kindness nearly breaks you. You've been fighting back tears since your capture, refusing to give your captors the satisfaction. But this simple act of sharing from someone who clearly has almost nothing to share makes your eyes burn. You quickly shove the bread into your mouth before anyone can take it from you, tasting dust and mold, but not caring. I'm Tomas, the boy says. Been here 3 winters now. Stay close to me tomorrow. I'll show you how things work. The overseer, Gunter, he likes to make examples of the new ones. Sleep comes in fitful bursts that night, despite your exhaustion. The hard ground, the sounds of coughing and occasional sobbing around you, the persistent itch of lice that have already found their way to your body all conspire to keep true rest at bay. And beneath it all runs a current of disbelief. Surely this is a nightmare. Surely you'll wake up tomorrow back in your village, with your family, with your freedom. But dawn comes too soon, announced by a loud bell and shouts from outside. Bodies around you stir, rising with the resigned movements of those who have done this countless times before. In the gray half-light, you see faces more clearly now, men and women of various ages, some bearing visible scars or deformities, all with the same dull look in their eyes. They don't rush, but they don't dawdle either. They know exactly how long they have before the overseers come looking for latecomers. Tomas appears at your side. Come, he says simply. We go to the kitchens first for a meal, then to the fields. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't look the master in the eye if he comes to inspect the work. And whatever you do, don't run. They enjoy the chase, and they enjoy the punishment even more. And just like that, your first full day as a medieval slave begins. You've lost your home, your family, your name, your status, meager as it was, and your freedom. all in the space of 3 days. The sound of a wooden spoon against a metal pot serves as your meal call. The kitchen yard is crowded with bodies, not just your fellow slaves, but servants of various stations. The hierarchy becomes immediately apparent even in this simple morning ritual. The household servants, technically not slaves, but bound servants, receive their portions first. Their tunics are still ragged, but marginally cleaner. They avoid eye contact with you and the other field slaves, as if your status might somehow be contagious. Your first meal as property is hardly memorable. A thin gruel of barley with occasional flecks of something that might generously be called meat. It sits in a wooden bowl that's been inexpertly carved and bears the stains of thousands of previous meals. No spoon is provided. You watch as the others lift the bowls to their lips and drink directly. You follow suit, the lukewarm mixture sliding down your throat, providing calories, if not satisfaction. Never expect more than this, Tomas whispers beside you. Save your disappointment for things that matter. It's while standing in this yard, clutching your empty bowl, that you first encounter the physical manifestation of your new legal status. The overseer, Gunter, a broad-shouldered man with a face marked by old scars, walks through the crowd with an assistant carrying a wooden box. They stop before you. New one, Gunter says. Not a question, but a statement. From the northern raid, he looks you up and down with the practiced eye of someone who has assessed hundreds of bodies for their labor value. His assistant opens the box, revealing a collection of iron collars. Medieval slavery operated under a complex legal framework that varied by region and era. In many parts of Europe by this period, the practice had evolved from the more formalized Roman system, existing in a gray area between serfdom and outright ownership. The legal codes of the time, influenced heavily by both Germanic tribal law and Roman legal traditions, had specific provisions for those deemed unfree. You are now learning these provisions in the most direct way possible. The collar they place around your neck is surprisingly heavy, a simple band of iron that's been hammered closed, with a small ring on one side where a chain could be attached if needed. It's not decorative or elaborate like the collars that would later become symbols of bondage in other times and places. This is purely functional, marking you as someone's property, someone without legal personhood. The smith who made it was concerned with durability, not comfort. The edges are rough, and you can already feel where it will chafe your skin raw. This one goes to the East Fields today, Gunter tells his assistant. Put him with the plow team. Let's see what he's worth. The fields lie beyond the manor's immediate grounds, a short walk that gives you your first real view of your new world. The manor is larger than you initially thought, a sprawling operation with numerous outbuildings, workshops, gardens, and extensive fields stretching to the horizon. This is no minor lord's holding, but a substantial economic enterprise, with you as its newest piece of equipment. As you walk, Tomas explains the reality of your legal position in hurried, hushed tones. The collar means you're not a person anymore. Not really. You can't own things. You can't marry without permission. If someone hurts you, the compensation goes to the master, not to you. If you run, they can hunt you down. If they catch you, he trails off. But the meaning is clear. Indeed, medieval law treated slaves as property, though with some important distinctions from chattel slavery of later centuries. For instance, the church still recognized your humanity in certain limited ways. You could still receive sacraments. Your soul was still considered immortal, but in practical terms, your legal existence had been reduced to an entry in someone's inventory, alongside livestock and farming implements. The east fields are being prepared for planting. The early spring soil still heavy with the last of winter's moisture. A team of men is already harnessed to a heavy wooden plow, taking the place of oxen. This is your first shock of the day. You had assumed you would be working with animals. But here, humans are the beasts of burden. Not enough oxen for all the fields, Tomas explains, seeing your expression. Master uses us where he can. Cheaper to feed humans than cattle sometimes. You're quickly fitted into a harness, leather straps that cross your chest and shoulders, attached to long ropes that connect to the plow. 5 other men stand with you, already harnessed. They give you nothing but tired glances. They've seen new faces come and go. The overseer's whip cracks, not hitting anyone, but serving as a signal. As one, the men lean forward into their harnesses, and you hastily follow suit. The wooden plow is heavier than anything you've ever pulled. Your muscles scream in protest as the metal-tipped share cuts into the earth, creating furrows for planting. Every step is a battle against the soil's resistance, multiplied by the weight of the plow itself. Behind you walks another slave, an older man whose job is to guide the plow, keeping the furrow straight. Behind him walks Gunter, occasionally calling out instructions or corrections, his whip always visible in his hand. The actual planting will come later, done by others. Your job is simply to be the muscle that prepares the earth. The morning wears on in a blur of pain and exertion. Your back muscles burn, your legs tremble, and the collar around your neck seems to grow heavier with each step. The leather harness chafes against your shoulders, even through the rough fabric of your tunic. You quickly learn the rhythm of the work, the way to lean your weight, how to step in unison with the others to minimize the strain. It's not skill, but survival. By midday, when a brief rest is called, your hands are bleeding from the ropes, and you collapse to the ground when released from the harness. An elderly woman moves among the workers, carrying a water skin. Each person gets a few precious swallows before she moves on. When she reaches you, she pauses. "New blood," she says, her voice rough from years of field dust. "Don't die too quick," makes the master angry to lose investment. This passes for encouragement here. The water tastes better than any wine you've ever had, though it's warm and has the faint taste of the leather skin that holds it. You want more, but the woman moves on before you can ask. Beside you, one of your fellow plow team members spits on the ground. "Save your strength," he mutters. "Afternoons always worse." He's right. After a brief meal more gruel, this time cold, and even less substantial than breakfast, you're back in the harness. The afternoon sun beats down, unusually warm for early spring. The soil seems to have hardened during your brief rest, offering even more resistance. Your muscles, already taxed beyond their limits, begin to fail you. Twice you stumble, earning sharp words from Gunter and dark looks from your teammates, who must compensate for your weakness. By the time the sun begins to set, you're moving forward through sheer force of will alone. Your entire body has become a single throbbing mass of pain. Your vision narrows to just the few feet of earth ahead of you. You've stopped thinking, stopped feeling anything beyond the next step. This, you dimly realize, is the point to reduce you to an automaton, a thing that moves and works without thought or complaint. When the day's labor finally ends, you're unharnessed like an animal and led back to the manor grounds. Your fellow slaves move with the slow, shuffling gait of the bone-weary, too tired even for conversation. The collar around your neck has rubbed your skin raw, leaving a ring of irritated flesh that burns with every movement. Your hands are blistered and bleeding. Tomorrow, you know, you'll be expected to do it all again. As you enter the slave quarters, the old woman from the fields catches your arm. "Let me see those hands," she says, her tone leaving no room for refusal. She examines your bleeding palms and clicks her tongue. From a small pouch at her waist, she produces a pinch of what looks like crushed herbs mixed with animal fat. "Hold still," she instructs, smearing the mixture across your wounds. It stings terribly, then goes numb. "Why?" you manage to ask, your first word in hours. "Dead slaves don't plow fields," she answers practically, "and I've buried enough young ones." That night, as you lie on the hard ground of the slave quarters, surrounded by the sounds of exhausted bodies seeking rest, you understand something fundamental about your new existence. The law has rewritten who you are. The collar around your neck is more than metal. It's the physical manifestation of invisible chains that bind you to this place, to this life. Your body is no longer your own. Your time is no longer your own. The fruits of your labor are no longer your own. And tomorrow, it all begins again. Darkness still blankets the world when the bell sounds to wake you. For a moment, disoriented and stiff, you don't recognize where you are. Then the weight of the iron collar around your neck brings reality crashing back. This is your life now. Day 2. Your muscles protest violently as you force yourself to sit up. Yesterday's labor has left them trembling and knotted. The blisters on your hands have hardened overnight into painful, swollen pockets of fluid. Beside you, Tomas is already standing, his small frame silhouetted against the faint light coming through the single window. "Hurry," he whispers. "Last ones to the yard get the worst jobs." The daylight rhythm of a medieval manor is dictated by the sun, but for slaves, the day begins in darkness. The overseer wants workers in position and ready the moment there's enough light to see. Every minute of daylight is valuable, especially in spring when fields must be prepared and planted to ensure the year's harvest. The morning routine repeats, the same thin gruel, the same jostling crowd. But today, you're sent to a different field with a different team. No plowing today. Instead, you're handed a heavy iron-tipped hoe and directed to a section of field that needs clearing of rocks and roots before it can be planted. From sunrise to sunset, Gunter explains to the group of 10 slaves gathered for this task. Any section not cleared properly will be inspected again tomorrow by the same workers. The threat is clear. Do it right the first time, or do it again tomorrow on top of the next day's assigned labor. The work begins as the first rays of sunlight break over the horizon. Compared to yesterday's plowing, this seems almost merciful at first. You have more autonomy, working your own section rather than being harnessed to others. But any relief is short-lived. The hoe is heavy, its wooden handle rough and splintering. Each strike into the soil sends shockwaves up your arms into your already aching shoulders. The rocks must be pried loose, carried to the field's edge, and piled. The roots, some as thick as your wrist, must be chopped through and pulled from the earth. By mid-morning, your hands have reopened, blood making the tool's handle slick and treacherous. The woman next to you, middle-aged, with skin tanned to leather by years in the fields, notices your struggle. Wrap them, she says, tearing a strip of cloth from the bottom of her already ragged tunic. Like this, she demonstrates, quickly binding her own hands with similar strips. The cloth, dirty as it is, provides some protection against further damage. "Thank you," you manage to say, as she helps you with your bindings. She shrugs. "We all started somewhere. I'm Ada." You begin, then stop. Your name, the one you were born with, suddenly feels distant, belonging to another life. No one has asked your name since your capture. You've been the new one, or simply pointed at with a finger. Doesn't matter what they called you before, Ada says. Understanding your hesitation, you'll be given a work name soon enough. Something simple they can shout across a field. Throughout medieval Europe, the practice of renaming slaves was common. Names were chosen for simplicity, sometimes based on origin, the Slav, which is, incidentally, where the word slave originates, sometimes based on physical characteristics, the tall one, sometimes just arbitrary labels that masters found easy to remember. Your identity, already stripped in so many ways, would be further eroded by this renaming. The sun climbs higher, beating down with unexpected intensity for the season. Sweat soaks through your tunic, mixing with dirt to create a gritty paste that chafes against your skin. There is no midday break here, just a brief pause to gulp water from a shared bucket and chew on a piece of hard bread distributed by one of Gunter's assistants. Then back to work, bending and striking, pulling and carrying. Around you, the other workers maintain a steady pace, not rushing, but not slowing either. They've learned exactly how much effort will avoid the overseer's attention. Occasionally, one will straighten up to stretch their back, using the moment to scan the field for approaching supervisors. It's a subtle dance of minimum effort and vigilant self-preservation. The trick, Ada tells you during one of these brief stretching moments, is to look busy when they're watching. The work will get done either way. No sense killing yourself faster than they already are. It's your first lesson in the art of passive resistance, a skill developed by slaves and forced laborers throughout history, not outright defiance, which would bring swift punishment, but small acts of work pacing that preserve some tiny measure of autonomy and strength. Late in the afternoon, the manor lord himself makes an appearance, riding along the edge of the fields on a magnificent black horse. This is your first glimpse of the man who owns you, and the contrast is jarring. While you stand covered in dirt and sweat, wearing rags and bleeding into makeshift hand wrappings, he sits tall in polished leather boots and a fine wool cloak, his beard neatly trimmed, his skin unmarked by sun or labor. The workers around you immediately lower their eyes when they notice his approach. You follow suit, understanding instinctively that meeting his gaze would be dangerous. He stops to converse with Gunter, their voices carried away by the breeze. You can't hear their words, but you can see the overseer gesturing toward different parts of the field, nodding deferentially as the Lord speaks. The master returns from town maybe once a month. Ada whispers without looking up from her work. He prefers his townhouse to the manor. Less smell. The Lord's visit is brief. He surveys the work, exchanges a few more words with Gunter, then rides back toward the manor house. The moment he's out of sight, you notice a subtle change in the field, workers straightening up more frequently, movements becoming slightly less hurried. Even Gunter seems less vigilant, his gaze wandering more often to the horizon, calculating the remaining daylight. Market day tomorrow, Ada explains when she notices your questioning look. Gunter will go to town with the master. His assistant will oversee us, not as sharp-eyed. We'll still work, but she doesn't finish the thought. But you understand. A small respite in the relentless routine. As the sun begins its descent, your section of field is finally cleared. Your back feels permanently bent. Your knees wobble with exhaustion, and your wrapped hands throb with a deep, steady pain. Around you, others are finishing as well, gathering tools to be returned to the storage shed. There's a careful accounting of these tools. Slaves are never allowed to keep anything that could serve as a weapon. The walk back to the manor compound feels longer than it did in the morning. Your legs move automatically, one foot in front of the other, while your mind retreats into a protective numbness. This is how slaves survive. You're learning by separating consciousness from physical sensation, by retreating into internal spaces where pain can't follow. Dinner is a slight improvement over breakfast. A stew of vegetables with actual visible chunks of turnip and carrot, and the occasional piece of fatty bacon providing flavor. The broth is thin, but it's hot, and after a day in the fields, it tastes like a feast. There's even a small piece of bread to go with it, though it's hard enough to risk your teeth. Sunday stew, Tomas explains when he finds you sitting against a wall, too tired to properly chew. Always a bit better on Sundays. Master thinks it makes him pious to feed us better once a week. You hadn't realized it was Sunday. The days of the week, like so many other markers of normal life, have lost their meaning. There was no church service, no rest day for the slaves, though you did notice fewer household servants in the fields, presumably freed to attend Mass with the Lord's family. That night, lying again on your patch of straw, you listen to the sounds around you. Someone is softly crying in a corner. Two men are whispering in a language you don't recognize. From outside comes the bark of a dog, followed by the harsh shout of a guard. These are the lullabies of your new existence. Ada appears beside you, kneeling to check your wrapped hands. She peels back the blood-stiffened cloth, clucking her tongue at what she finds beneath. "You'll toughen up," she says, not unkindly. "We all do. Skin gets thicker, bones get stronger, or they break, and then you're sent to different work." She produces more of the numbing salve from yesterday, applying it with gentle efficiency. Try to sleep. Tomorrow comes too soon. As she moves away, you catch her arm. "How long?" you ask, the question encompassing everything. How long have you been here? How long does it take to adjust? How long can someone live like this? She understands. 8 years, she replies, since I was not much older than Tomas. My village was raided during the border wars. And does it get, you begin. No, she interrupts, her voice gentle but firm. It doesn't get easier. You just get better at surviving it. With this small, hard truth ringing in your ears, exhaustion finally pulls you under into sleep. The next day waits, identical in its demands, relentless in its progression, inescapable in its reality. This is the rhythm of slave labor in medieval Europe, an endless cycle of sunrise to sunset toil, broken only by the minimal rest necessary to preserve the body as a working tool. And so passes your second full day as property, your body already changing, adapting to its new purpose as a machine for another's PR. The seasons change, but your hunger does not. 3 months have passed since your first day in the fields, and spring has fully given way to summer. The crops planted during those back-breaking early weeks now stand knee-high in some fields, waist-high in others. The visible proof of your labor surrounds you, though you'll see precious little benefit from the eventual harvest. Your body has changed too. The initial blisters have long since hardened into calluses. Your hands, once soft from peasant work that was hard, but still your own, now bear a network of scars and thickened skin. You've lost weight, the sharp edges of your ribs more prominent under your tunic, but gained wiry muscle. The collar around your neck no longer chafes as badly. The skin beneath has toughened, though the iron still leaves a permanent dark ring that no amount of scrubbing will remove. Today you're working in the vegetable gardens closer to the manor house. It's considered easier duty than the grain fields, reserved for those who have proven themselves reliable workers. The proximity to the kitchen means occasionally catching enticing aromas of food you'll never taste: roasting meat, fresh bread, herbs, and spices that never find their way into slave meals. The smell of other people's abundance becomes its own form of torture. Don't look, Ada advises, noticing your distraction as a kitchen servant passes with a tray bound for the manor house. It makes the hunger worse. Hunger is your constant companion now, more familiar than any friend. The daily rations for slaves are calculated with mathematical precision. Enough calories to maintain work capacity, not enough to build strength or resistance. Most medieval lords viewed feeding slaves as a necessary expense, much like maintaining farm equipment. Records from manor houses across Europe show careful accounting of food distributed to the unfree, always balancing minimum need against maximum profit. Breakfast remains the same thin gruel, sometimes with a piece of hard bread if supplies allow. The midday meal taken in the fields is typically cold pottage, a thick soup of whatever vegetables are in least demand for the manor kitchen, usually the toughest, stringiest, or most withered. Dinner might include a small piece of salt pork or fish on special occasions, but more often it's just another bowl of pottage, perhaps slightly thicker than the midday version. The trick, Tomas had explained early in your captivity, is to eat slowly. Makes your stomach think there's more coming. You've developed other strategies as well. Like many of your fellow slaves, you've learned which weeds growing along field edges are edible, surreptitiously grabbing handfuls when the overseers aren't looking. You've discovered where the wild berries grow on the manor's boundaries, though reaching them requires volunteering for certain work details that take you to the outer fields. You've even taken to saving a small portion of your evening meal, hiding it in a scrap of cloth to eat in the middle of the night when hunger pangs wake you. These small food thefts are technically punishable. Everything on the manor belongs to your master, including the weeds and wild plants. But the overseers generally turn a blind eye as long as work doesn't suffer. They know that starving slaves are poor workers, and the master's formal rations are barely adequate. You're getting skinny, Gunter observes as he passes your row in the garden. It's not concern in his voice, but calculation. A slave too weak to work efficiently is a problem to be solved. Put him on well duty tomorrow, he tells his assistant. Then slaughterhouse cleanup. Fatten him up a bit. You've heard of well duty hauling water for the manor's extensive needs. It's exhausting work, but comes with certain advantages. Wells are often located near kitchens, increasing chances of scraps or leftovers finding their way to the water carriers. And the slaughterhouse, while stomach-turning for the uninitiated, provides proximity to animal parts deemed inedible by the manor residents, but treasured by the chronically hungry: marrow bones, organ meats, blood that can be secretly collected and added to evening pottage. Good fortune, Ada murmurs when Gunter moves on. Make friends with the butcher's boy. He can be bribed with small favors. The medieval diet varied dramatically by social class. While your master's table might feature fresh meats, white bread, fine wines, and imported spices, the typical slave diet consisted almost entirely of grains and vegetables, the cheapest, most calorie-dense foods available. Protein was rare and precious, which explains why slaves developed elaborate systems for acquiring and sharing animal products whenever possible. That evening, as you sit with your back against the stable wall, eating your meager dinner, you notice Tomas approaching with a stranger, a boy, perhaps a year or two older than him, wearing the slightly better clothing of a household servant. "This is my friend," Tomas says simply, "sitting beside you." The other boy nods, but remains standing, eyes constantly scanning the yard for overseers or guards. "Kitchen boy," Tomas explains in a low voice. "Sometimes he has extras." As if on cue, the boy pulls something from inside his tunic, a small bundle wrapped in a cabbage leaf. He drops it casually beside you, then walks away without a word, his movements natural and unhurried. You wait until he's out of sight before carefully unwrapping the bundle. Inside lies a treasure beyond price, a chicken leg already cooked, with most of the meat still attached to the bone. Your mouth floods with saliva at the sight of it. "Not here," Tomas hisses. "Too many eyes. Take it to the sleeping house under your blanket." The blanket he refers to is really just a threadbare piece of sacking, barely large enough to cover your shoulders, but it will conceal your feast from prying eyes. You rewrap the chicken and tuck it into your tunic, heart pounding, with a mixture of gratitude and fear. Discovery would mean punishment for you, for Tomas, and most severely for the kitchen boy, who risked his relatively privileged position to smuggle food. "Why?" you ask Tomas, wondering why the kitchen boy would take such a risk for someone he doesn't know. Tomas shrugs. "You helped me last week when Gunter was angry about the missing tools. He would have blamed me. This is true, you had spoken up, claiming responsibility for misplacing a hoe that had actually been taken by one of the older slaves. The punishment had been light, extra work hours, and reduced rations for a day, but it had spared Tomas, who was already in disfavor after a bout of illness had reduced his work capacity. We help each other," Tomas continues. "It's the only way." Later, in the relative privacy of your sleeping corner, you unwrap the chicken leg and examine it in the dim light filtering through the single high window. It's not a large piece, and it's been picked over by someone at the main table, but to your eyes, it's a feast fit for nobility. You break it in half, one part for now, one to save for tomorrow. The flavor is overwhelming after months of bland pottage and gruel. The saltiness, the richness of the fat, the unfamiliar satisfaction of meat between your teeth. It's almost too much for your senses to process. You eat slowly, savoring each tiny bite, letting the flavor linger on your tongue. Across the room, you notice Ada watching you with a small smile. She nods once, approving of your careful rationing, then returns to mending a tear in her tunic. Nothing is said, but the message is clear. She's seen many slaves come and go, and those who survive longest are those who learn to manage scarcity with intelligence rather than desperation. The food situation for medieval slaves was complicated by the church calendar. Even slaves were theoretically expected to observe religious fast days, when meat and animal products were forbidden. In practice, manor lords often ignored these restrictions for field workers during particularly demanding seasons, viewing it as a practical necessity rather than religious defiance. But the rhythm of feast and fast days created additional uncertainty in an already precarious nutritional balance. Tomorrow is St. Bartholomew's Day, Ada tells you later, sitting beside you in the fading evening light. There will be a special meal for the household. Kitchen scraps will be better than usual. This is how slave society measures time, not by hours or personal milestones, but by the fleeting opportunities for slightly less deprivation. A saint's feast day means leftovers. A manor celebration means the dregs of wine casks might find their way to slave quarters. A visiting dignitary means increased cooking activity and therefore increased chances of food being misplaced, forgotten, or deliberately diverted. That night, with the unaccustomed richness of chicken still lingering in your system, sleep comes more easily than usual. Your body, constantly operating at a caloric deficit, greedily absorbs the protein and fat, directing it to repairs you didn't even know were needed. In the morning, you feel different, not exactly stronger, but somehow more substantial, as if the single piece of meat has reminded your body of what it means to be properly fed. Well, duty proves to be exactly as Ada described backbreaking labor, hauling heavy buckets from the manor's 3 wells to various storage containers throughout the compound. By midday, your shoulders burn from the wooden yoke, used to carry 2 buckets at once, and water has soaked through your tunic from inevitable splashing. But the compensation comes at noon, when the cook's assistant, a harried woman with a permanent scowl, tosses you a piece of bread that's been burned on one side. Make sure the laundry cistern is filled next, she barks, her gruffness a cover for what is, in its way, an act of mercy. The burned bread would have been discarded anyway, but by giving it directly to you, she ensures it won't be fought over or divided into portions too small to matter. You gulp down the bread, barely tasting it, aware that others are watching with naked envy. This is another aspect of slave life. You're still adjusting to the way scarcity breeds competition, even among those who should be natural allies. The instinct to share, still strong from your previous life, constantly battles with the new reality that generosity can leave you too weak to work, too weak to survive. As the summer sun beats down, turning the well yard into a furnace of reflected heat, you haul your buckets and watch the water disappear into storage containers, animal troughs, kitchen sinks, and laundry vats. Your world narrows to the distance between well and destination, the rhythm of dipping and carrying, the constant calculation of how much strength remains versus how many trips are required, and always, always, the awareness of hunger, waiting in the background like a patient predator, ready to consume you from within the moment your vigilance slips. Night brings its own peculiar miseries. The slave quarters, what you've come to think of as home despite yourself, is a study in medieval squalor. The long, low building with its packed earth floor and rough timber walls houses 23 slaves when at full capacity. Currently, you share the space with 21 others, the reduction in numbers owing to a fever that claimed one life last month, and a second slave who was sold to a traveling merchant to settle a debt. You've established a sleeping spot against the north wall, as far from the single waste bucket in the corner as possible. The summer heat makes the smell nearly unbearable, especially in the mornings before the bucket is emptied. Your bedding consists of a thin layer of straw, replaced once a month if supplies allow, and the threadbare sackcloth that serves as both blanket and pillow, depending on need. In winter, you've been told, the slaves huddle together for warmth, personal space sacrificed for survival. But in summer, everyone spreads out as much as the crowded conditions permit. Above you, the roof, shingled with wooden planks that have warped with age, allows thin streams of moonlight to filter through the gaps. When it rains, these same gaps become channels for water that turns portions of the floor to mud. The more experienced slaves have learned exactly where to position their sleeping pallets to avoid the worst leaks. You learned through trial and error, moving your spot 3 times during spring rains before finding a relatively dry location. Sleep never comes easily, despite physical exhaustion. The sounds of the sleeping house form a grim nocturne, coughing from the older slaves whose lungs have been damaged by years of dust and field smoke, the occasional whimper of someone caught in a nightmare, the persistent scratching of those battling lice or fleas, and always the rats, scurrying along the edges of the room, bold enough sometimes to investigate sleepers for crumbs or food scraps hidden in clothing. You get used to it, Tomas had assured you during your first weeks. Soon you'll sleep through everything. He was partly right. The body adapts, finding rest even in the most adverse conditions. But true, deep sleep, the kind that actually restores and heals, remains elusive. Most nights you drift in a half-conscious state, aware enough to swat at rats that venture too close, asleep enough to lose track of time until the morning bell. Tonight, though, sleep is particularly difficult. The chicken from earlier has awakened your digestive system, unaccustomed to processing protein and fat. Your stomach gurgles and cramps, not unpleasantly, but insistently enough to keep you awake. Beside you, an older slave named Gregor snores with the distinctive rattle that signals the lung sickness many field workers develop. On your other side, a space lies empty where the fever victim once slept. No one has moved to claim the spot, despite the extra room it would provide. A superstitious avoidance of death's lingering presence. Medieval attitudes toward hygiene varied widely, but for slaves and serfs, practicality often trumped cleanliness. Water was for drinking and cooking first. Washing came as a distant luxury. In the manor house proper, the lord's family might enjoy occasional baths, perfumes, and herbal preparations to mask body odors. In the slave quarters, the best one could hope for was a quick rinse in the horse trough if assigned to stable duty, or a dip in the stream during summer field work if the overseer was feeling generous. The result is a persistent layer of grime that becomes part of your skin, working its way into every crease and pore. Your hair, uncut since your capture, hangs in matted strings, home to lice that you've stopped bothering to pick out individually. Instead, using occasional applications of vinegar water that someone steals from the kitchen stores, your tunic and braise, the simple lower garment worn by male workers, are stiff with dirt and sweat, the fabric itself disintegrating at stress points like knees and elbows. A quiet voice breaks through your thoughts. Still awake, it's Ada, her sleeping pallet just a few feet away across the narrow central pathway that divides the room. You nod, realizing she can probably see you in the faint moonlight streaming through the roof gaps. First meet in months always keeps you up, she says, with quiet understanding. Body forgets how to handle it. How did you know? She gives a soft laugh, barely more than an exhale. I know everything that happens here. Saw the kitchen boy talking to Tomas. Saw how you ate your pottage tonight slowly, without the usual desperation. Simple enough to figure out. There's a pause, then she asks, what were you before? In your old life? The question startles you. It's not something slaves often discuss, the before time. It serves no practical purpose and often just deepens the misery of present circumstances. But tonight, with sleep elusive and your body strangely energized by proper nutrition, the question feels less painful than usual. Farmer, you answer simply. Small holding, rented from the village lord. You hesitate, then add, I had a family. The words stick in your throat. Ada doesn't press for details about that family, what happened to them during the raid, whether they survived or were taken elsewhere. Such information is irrelevant to current survival. Instead, she nods. Farmers' hands adapt well to this life. You're lucky. I've seen soft-handed craftsmen die within months, their bodies unable to adjust. She shifts, the straw beneath her rustling. I was a weaver's daughter. My hands were strong from the loom, but not ready for field work. First year was, she trails off, the memory clearly still potent after 8 years. This quiet exchange of personal history is a rare gift in slave quarters, where the past is generally a forbidden country, too painful to revisit. The sharing creates a momentary bridge between you not quite friendship, but a recognition of shared humanity that the collar and harsh conditions try to strip away. The conversation is interrupted by a commotion outside, male voices, the barking of dogs, the distinctive sound of horses' hooves on packed earth. The other sleepers stir, some sitting up in alarm. Nighttime disturbances usually mean trouble. New arrivals, Ada whispers, her experienced ear identifying the sounds. Late for transport, probably being housed in the holding pen tonight. The holding pen is a separate structure, smaller than the main sleeping house, used for newly acquired slaves before they're assigned permanent quarters, or for those awaiting transport to other properties or markets. It's even more rudimentary than your current shelter. No straw for bedding, no bucket for waste, just bare earth and four walls. Morning comes too soon, as always. The bell rings while the sky is still more gray than blue, calling you to another day of labor. Your body protests, joints stiff from the hard ground, muscles still fatigued from yesterday's exertions, stomach already growling despite the relative feast of the previous evening. But you rise, because the alternative is punishment. The morning routine unfolds with practiced efficiency. Empty the waste bucket. Form the line for gruel distribution. Eat quickly while standing in the yard. Await assignment for the day's labor. But today, there's an additional element. The new arrivals Ada predicted, now standing in a huddled group near the overseer's hut. There are 5 of them, all men, ranging from a boy younger than Tomas to a gray-bearded elder who looks too frail for field work. They bear the unmistakable signs of recent captivity, bruised faces, rope burns on wrists, the hollow-eyed shock of those still adjusting to their newfound status as property. Their clothing is torn and dirty, but of better quality than slave garb, indicating recent citizenship in the world of the free. Captured from the eastern villages, Gunter announces to his assembled workforce. Fighting broke out again along the border. These are the spoils. He surveys the newcomers with a practiced eye, then begins assigning them duties based on his assessment of their capabilities. You watch the process with strange detachment, recognizing your own experience from months ago played out on new faces. The confusion, the fear barely masked by defiance, the desperate glances at surroundings, and potential escape routes, all familiar, all futile. The manor's walls are high, its guards vigilant, its dogs trained to track human scent for miles. Even if these newcomers managed to flee the immediate compound, the surrounding countryside offers little shelter to obvious runaways. Medieval slavery operated within a legal framework that heavily favored recapture. Fugitive slaves could be hunted across territorial boundaries, with neighboring lords often cooperating to return each other's property. The punishment for attempted escape typically involved physical brutality, designed not just to harm, but to visibly mark the offender as a warning to others. Brands, facial scars, or amputated digits served as permanent reminders of the consequences of defiance. Your contemplation of the newcomers is cut short by your own assignment for the day, field clearing again, but this time in a distant section of the property where an old orchard is being converted to grain production. It's a full hour's walk from the main compound, which means leaving immediately after breakfast and carrying midday provisions with you. The distance also means less supervision, as Gunter can't spare men to constantly monitor workers so far from the central operations. As you collect tools from the shed and a small sack of hard bread and dried apple slices for midday, Ada appears beside you, her own provisions in hand. "We're on the same detail," she says. "Lucky coincidence. But you've been at the manor long enough now to know there are few coincidences in slave assignments. You requested it, you ask, surprised that such requests would ever be granted." She gives a small shrug. "I mentioned to Gunter that I've cleared old orchards before, know how to handle the root systems properly. You're still learning, so it made sense to pair us. The fact that Gunter would consider a slave's input on work assignments is surprising, but you've noticed that Ada occupies a unique position in the hierarchy. Her years of service and comprehensive knowledge of the manor's operations make her valuable beyond mere labor. She's often consulted on matters requiring institutional memory, where boundary markers were placed years ago, which fields flooded during the last major storm, which work teams performed best at particular tasks. The walk to the distant orchard takes you through parts of the estate you've never seen before. The manor lands are extensive, encompassing not just agricultural fields, but wooded sections, streams, small quarries for stone, and even a defunct mill whose water wheel stopped turning years ago when the stream was diverted for irrigation. Throughout medieval Europe, such manors functioned as nearly self-sufficient economic units, producing almost everything needed for operation and generating surplus for market. By the time you reach the old orchard, the sun has fully risen, promising another scorching summer day. The trees, apple and pear mostly, their gnarled trunks testifying to decades of productivity, have already been cut down, leaving only stumps to be removed. It's formidable work, requiring both strength and technique to extract roots that have grown deep and wide over generations. Ada demonstrates the proper approach, showing you how to dig around the stump to expose the major roots. Then use a combination of axe and lever to pry the wood from the earth. It's exhausting labor, but there's a strange satisfaction in the clear progress, each extracted stump a visible accomplishment, unlike the endless repetition of most field work. As you work side by side, Ada gradually reveals the true purpose of requesting this shared assignment. Away from the main compound, beyond the ears of informants and the eyes of overseers, slaves can speak more freely, share information, and even in very limited ways plan. "Winter's coming in a few months," she says casually, as she leverages her weight against a root. "You're first here, You need to be prepared. The first frost arrives during the night, covering the ground with a delicate white crust that crunches beneath your feet as you make your way to the morning meal. Your breath forms visible clouds in the air, and your fingers ache with cold as you clutch your wooden bowl. The thin gruel steams in the morning chill, providing momentary warmth to your hands before it's quickly consumed. Winter has come to the manor, and with it, a new dimension of suffering. Your tunic, adequate during summer and barely tolerable in autumn, provides almost no protection against the winter cold. The fabric, worn thin from months of wear and infrequent washing, allows the wind to cut through as if you were wearing nothing at all. Your feet, wrapped in crude foot bindings rather than proper shoes, a luxury reserved for household servants and freemen, are constantly damp and cold. The iron collar around your neck, once a torment because of chafing and weight, now becomes an instrument of specialized torture, the metal quickly adopting the temperature of the surrounding air, creating a band of intense cold that seems to drain warmth from your entire body. Gather round, Gunter calls to the assembled workers. Winter assignments, the labor cycle of a medieval manor, followed the seasons with absolute fidelity. The frantic planting of spring, the weeding and tending of summer, the harvest rush of autumn, all these give way to winter's different but equally demanding work. Fields lie dormant under frost and snow, but the enterprise of the manor continues. Thrashing barn, Gunter points to a group that includes several older slaves and 2 of the newcomers. Wood cutting, he designates another team, mostly stronger men including yourself. Root cellar sorting, a 3rd group, primarily women. Repairs, a 4th, comprising those with specific skills, carpentry, basic smithing, leather work. The winter redistribution of labor ensures that no slave remains idle during the agricultural off-season. Productivity must be maintained regardless of weather or growing conditions. In many ways, winter work is actually more grueling than summer labor conducted in freezing conditions, with fewer breaks, and often extending into the darker hours by candlelight or torch. Your assignment to the wood-cutting team is both blessing and curse. The physical exertion will help keep you warm during work hours, but the constant exposure to the elements brings its own dangers. Frostbite, particularly on extremities, is a common winter affliction among slaves. Fingers and toes are often the first casualties, turning black and eventually requiring amputation, which further reduces a slave's work capacity and value. Stay close to Ada, Tomas whispers, as the groups begin to disperse to their assignments. She knows winter survival, but you notice that Ada has been assigned to the root cellar, while you're headed for the forest edge with axes and saws. There will be no experienced guide for this new challenge. The wood-cutting team is led by a freeman named Oscar, a bearish man with a tangled black beard, who serves as the manor's primary forester. He's not an overseer like Gunter, but rather a skilled laborer who directs specific tasks requiring his expertise. His attitude toward the slaves is neither kind nor cruel, merely practical, viewing you as necessary tools for his work. 6 cords per day, he announces, as you reach the designated cutting area, a section of forest at the eastern edge of the manor lands. Any team that falls short works into the night to meet quota. A cord of wood is a substantial amount, a stack 4 feet high, 4 feet wide, and 8 feet long, precisely arranged. 6 cords represents an enormous quantity of timber to be felled, cut to length, split, and stacked in a single day. You exchange glances with the other slaves on the team, all recognizing the challenge ahead. The work begins immediately. 2 men work each tree, one swinging the axe to create the notch that will direct the fall, the other manning the 2-person saw that will complete the cut from the opposite side. Once the tree is down, additional teams move in to remove branches, cut the trunk into manageable sections, split those sections into fireplace-sized pieces, and finally stack the finished product in the precise arrangements that constitute a measurable cord. It's dangerous work under the best conditions. In winter, with frozen ground creating unstable footing, cold stiffened hands struggling to maintain grip on tools, and the constant threat of snow or ice adding unpredictable weight to branches, the danger multiplies. Medieval medicine had little to offer for the crushed limbs, deep lacerations, or internal injuries that commonly resulted from forestry accidents. By midday, your group has completed just over 2 cords. The pace is insufficient to meet the quota before dark, but no one dares slow down despite growing fatigue. The consequences of failure, working by torchlight in even colder night air with exhausted muscles, are too dire to risk. The midday meal, such as it is, arrives via a kitchen boy pulling a small sledge loaded with a pot of pottage and a sack of hard bread. The food is nearly frozen by the time it reaches you, the bread requiring careful handling to avoid breaking teeth on its rock-like consistency. The pottage can only be eaten by scraping away the frozen surface layer to reach the merely cold mush beneath. Eat quickly, Oscar commands. Daylight is short. One of the older men on the team, a slave you've seen but rarely spoken with, slips on the icy ground while returning to work, crashing heavily onto his side with a sickening sound that suggests something has broken. He cries out, clutching his hip, his face contorted in pain. Oscar examines him briefly, prodding the injured area with experienced hands. Hips broken, he pronounces. Useless for cutting now. He gestures to 2 of the younger slaves. Take him back to the compound. Tell Gunter what happened. Then return immediately. The injured man whimpers as he's half carried, half dragged back toward the manor buildings. Everyone knows what likely awaits him: minimal treatment, reassignment to whatever sedentary task might be possible while the injury heals, if it heals at all, and a significant reduction in rations as his value to the household diminishes. Many slaves with serious injuries simply waste away over time, their food allocation insufficient to support healing, while also maintaining basic life functions. With the team now 2 men short, the injured slave plus one of the escorts who hasn't yet returned, the work falls even more heavily on those remaining. You find yourself assigned to splitting duty, swinging a heavy maul repeatedly to divide sections of trunk into usable firewood pieces. The physical effort keeps you warmer than some of the others, but also drains your energy more quickly. By mid-afternoon, your arms tremble with each swing, accuracy diminishing as muscles approach failure. Pace yourself, advises the man working beside you, a slave named Dieter who's been at the manor for 5 years. Long swings, let the weight of the maul do the work. You'll last longer. These small kindnesses, fragments of advice, shared techniques, warnings about particular dangers, constitute the primary support system among slaves. Formal training is virtually non-existent. Knowledge transfers instead through observation and occasional whispered guidance. The skills accumulate like layers, building a thin armor against the worst deprivations and risks. As the winter sun begins its early descent, casting long blue shadows across the work area, Oscar makes his assessment of the day's progress. 4.5 cords, he announces. Not enough. We continue until the quota is met. No one protests. Complaint would change nothing except perhaps to earn additional punishment. Instead, the team adjusts to the reality, mentally preparing for at least 2 more hours of labor in deepening cold and fading light. Torches are brought from the manor, along with a small brazier that offers minimal warming capabilities for hands too numb to safely grip tools. The work continues by flickering orange light, the forest around you transforming into a shadowy maze where depth perception becomes uncertain, and each axe swing carries additional risk. It's well past the normal dinner hour when the final cord is completed. Your stomach has moved beyond hunger to a hollow emptiness that seems to echo with each movement. Your hands, despite periodic warming at the brazier, have lost most sensation, making the walk back to the compound a stumbling journey of uncertain footing and deadened reflexes. The slave quarters are nearly dark when you arrive, most of the others already having eaten and claimed their sleeping spots. The kitchen has set aside food for the wood-cutting team, cold pottage and bread, standard fare, but utterly inadequate for replenishing the massive caloric deficit created by a day of intense physical labor in freezing conditions. You eat mechanically, too exhausted for your usual careful rationing. Beside you, Dieter does the same, occasionally flexing his hands as feeling painfully returns with warming. Tomorrow will be worse, he says matter-of-factly. First day back is always easier than the second. Bodies haven't learned what's coming yet. He's right, of course. Throughout your enslavement, you've discovered this pattern. The first day of any new labor brings its own shock and difficulty. But the second day arrives with muscles already screaming from unaccustomed movement, joints stiff from new stresses, blisters formed, but not yet hardened into protective calluses. Ada finds you as you're finishing your meager meal. "Let me see your hands," she demands without preamble. She examines them critically, noting the split skin across the palms, the swelling around knuckles, the dark purple marks where blood vessels have broken beneath the surface. From a small pouch at her waist, the same one that has produced healing salves in the past, she extracts a greasy mixture that smells of pine resin and something muskier. "Bear fat," she explains, as she rubs it into your damaged skin, mixed with pine sap and comfrey root, stolen bit by bit from the leatherworking supplies, helps the cracks heal overnight. The mixture stings at first, then produces a numbing warmth that spreads gradually from your hands up your wrists. You flex your fingers, finding them already more mobile than moments before. "The injured man," you ask, remembering the sickening sound of the hip breaking. "Where is he?" Ada's expression darkens. "Storage shed for now. They'll decide tomorrow if he's worth healing or not." This cold calculation of human value represents the fundamental reality of slave economics in medieval Europe. Medical care, limited as it was by contemporary knowledge, required resources. The herbwoman's time, poultices, and tinctures from limited stores, food to support recovery. These investments would only be made for slaves deemed valuable enough to justify the expenditure. Age, previous work capacity, particular skills, all factored into the merciless math of whether healing would be attempted beyond the most basic intervention. "Will they?" you begin, not quite able to finish the question. "Let him die." Ada completes your thought, not intentionally, but they won't waste resources keeping him alive if the hip won't heal properly. They'll give him minimal care, reduced rations since he can't work. Nature takes its course eventually. The matter-of-fact way she delivers this prognosis strikes you as both horrifying and merciful, the clarity of truth without useless sentimentality. After 6 months as property, you're beginning to understand this perspective, to see how emotional attachments become unsustainable luxuries in an environment where death and suffering are administrative matters rather than human tragedies. That night, despite bone-deep exhaustion, sleep comes in fragmented bursts. The sounds of coughing echo more prominently through the sleeping quarters as winter respiratory ailments take hold. The cold seeps through the inadequate walls, making your thin blanket seem laughably insufficient. Twice you wake to find yourself shivering uncontrollably, your body's desperate attempt to generate heat through movement. Just before dawn, snow begins to fall, visible through the roof gaps, as faint white movements against the black sky. By morning, a fresh inch covers the ground, transforming the manor landscape into a deceptively pristine scene that masks the suffering contained within its boundaries. The morning bell sounds, Another day begins. Your body screams in protest as you force stiffened limbs to move, knowing that the alternative, remaining in your sleeping pallet, would bring consequences far worse than physical pain. Winter has only just begun, stretching endlessly before you like the forest, where today you'll again swing axes and mauls, until your hands bleed and freeze, in an ongoing cycle of survival that permits no weakness and offers no reprieve. This is the specialized misery of winter for the medieval slave, a season not of rest, but of different torments. Each day a battle not just for productivity, but for basic biological persistence in a world designed to extract maximum labor while providing minimum sustenance. You've grown accustomed to the rhythms of servitude, the morning bell, the aching joints, the evening stillness where you find a moment to actually exist as something more than property. But bondage is not a solitary experience. Around you move other faces, other hands that work alongside your own. Some arrived years before you. Others were born into this life, never knowing anything else. The social world of a slave is both expansive and claustrophobic. Your circle of human contact is actually quite large. Kitchen slaves, field hands, stable boys, laundry women, yet constrained within the exact same walls that imprison you. These people become your reluctant family, though you've learned the bitter lesson that forming deep attachments only invites future pain. Still, you need them to survive. Among your fellow bondsmen exists a complex hierarchy invisible to your masters. The head cook practically struts when addressing the scullery girls. The chambermaid who tends directly to the lady of the manor looks down her nose at you, stable filth still clinging to your fingernails. Even among the lowest, there are those who have found ways to be lower still. The frail older man who mumbles to himself is openly mocked, while the young woman who caught the master's eye is simultaneously envied and pitied. Make yourself useful to Agnes, an older slave whispered to you during your second week. She's been here 30 years and knows how to survive. The masters trust her. This advice proves invaluable. Agnes, with her stooped shoulders and knowing eyes, shows you which tasks to finish thoroughly and which can be merely performed well enough when nobody's watching. She teaches you to move efficiency above perfection when nobody important will notice the difference. You quickly learn which of your fellow slaves can be trusted. There are those who curry favor with the overseers by reporting minor infractions. Thomas didn't clean the horse stalls properly, they'll say, hoping this small betrayal might earn them a crust of bread or moment of approval. Others maintain an unspoken solidarity, a collective understanding that your common condition binds you together against those who own your bodies, but not necessarily your spirits. The language between slaves develops its own vocabulary and meaning. A particular nod communicates that the master is approaching in a foul mood. A specific gesture warns that the lady is counting the dried fruits again, looking for thieves. You develop a shorthand of survival together, passed from the experienced to the novice. actual friendship blossoms rarely but intensely. There's Matilda, who sings softly while washing linens, her voice carrying across the courtyard like a memory of freedom. You find yourself lingering near the washing area when she works. Or Willem, missing 3 fingers, but somehow still the most skilled at mending tools. He shows you how to fashion a small wooden figure from scraps, a tiny act of creation in a life defined by servicing the creations of others. Most troubling is when attraction stirs between slaves. Any union, any coupling, any child born would belong not to the parents, but to the master. Some owners encourage such pairings, seeing them as breeding opportunity, a chance for more property without purchase cost. Others forbid it, fearing the complications of divided loyalties. You've seen both, the anguish of parents watching their children sold away, and the deliberate separation of couples who grew too devoted to each other. Your relationships with your masters follow their own peculiar orbits. To some, you are virtually invisible, a moving piece of the household's machinery, acknowledged only when malfunctioning. The lady of the manor rarely looks at your face, addressing commands to a point somewhere above your left shoulder. Her children, however, sometimes regard you with curiosity, not yet fully indoctrinated into seeing you as something less than human. The steward knows your name, at least barking, "You there, Giles." When assigning additional tasks, he maintains a business-like detachment. You are inventory to be managed, not abused unnecessarily, but utilized fully. Efficiency demands that you remain healthy enough to work, but submissive enough not to cause disruption. Most complex is your relationship with the master himself. Some days, he seems almost to see you as a person, asking your opinion on the health of his prized stallion, or nodding with something resembling respect when you complete a difficult task. Other days, you might as well be a chair or table, something to be used without acknowledgement. And on his worst days, when wine has loosened his temper or matters of business have soured his mood, you become the convenient target for frustrations he cannot express elsewhere. You've learned to read the master's moods with extraordinary precision. The slight tightening around his eyes means danger. Best to make yourself scarce, or at least inconspicuous. His left hand tapping against his leg signals impatience. Work faster or suffer consequences. The particular way he stands when addressing the steward while you're present, but not being addressed directly, means he's discussing your future use. Each gesture becomes a text you must translate immediately and accurately. Never look him directly in the eye. Agnes had instructed you early on, but never look too obsequious either. Men of power despise obvious fear almost as much as they despise obvious defiance. Find the middle path, eyes slightly downcast, back straight, hands still. Become furniture with awareness. There are others in the household whose attention you actively avoid. The master's nephew, visiting from abroad, regards the slaves with cruel curiosity, like a child pulling wings from insects. The head groom takes pleasure in finding fault with your work, no matter how how carefully performed. The priest, who visits monthly, seems to look through you entirely, as though your soul is already forfeit by virtue of your station. You find yourself most human in the brief exchanges with those occupying middle spheres, the traveling merchants who treat you with casual indifference rather than deliberate contempt, or the village tradespeople who might acknowledge you with a nod when delivering goods to the manor. These tiny recognitions of your humanity become treasures you hoard jealously within. Surprisingly, it's often the children who treat you most humanly. The master's youngest daughter once shared her sweet cake with you when no one was looking. The stable boy from the village asked your name and actually waited for an answer. They haven't yet fully absorbed the ideology that separates human value by status and ownership. You wonder when they will, knowing this innocence cannot last. Most painful are the encounters with free peasants who look upon you with either pity or contempt, sometimes both simultaneous. At least we choose our miseries, one farmer muttered while delivering grain. You wanted to argue that his choices seemed scarcely less constrained than your own, but speaking such thoughts aloud would only invite punishment. The social world of bondage is a twisted mirror of the larger society. You have your hierarchies, your friendships, your rivals, your secret liaisons, all existing within a framework where none of you truly own yourselves. It creates peculiar bonds. You've come to care deeply for people you might never have acknowledged in the free world, united by common suffering and the wordless understanding of what it means to live as property. At night, when work finally ceases, this community reveals itself most fully. Huddled in the slave quarters, someone might risk telling a story from their homeland or sharing a scrap of song remembered from childhood. These moments of cultural memory become powerful reminders that you were people before you were possessions. The old man who remembers farming techniques from his village, the woman who can still recite poetry her father taught her, even you, struggling to recall your mother's face, but still able to hum the lullaby she sang. As you drift toward sleep, surrounded by the breathing of your fellow bondsmen, you realize that they have become, for better or worse, your people now. Tomorrow you will rise together, work together, suffer together. Their faces lined with exhaustion, but occasionally lighting with stubborn humanity, are the landscape of your world. Their whispered conversations and shared glances form the geography of the only community left to you. And in this knowledge lives both your deepest sorrow and your most essential comfort. The master's whip cracks against the back of Willem, your friend, with the missing fingers, for a transgression so minor you didn't even notice it. Something about improper care of a saddle strap, as his skin splits open and he bites down hard on his lip to avoid crying out. Something hardens inside you, not the jolt of rebellion that would lead to your immediate destruction, but something quieter, more sustainable, a small pocket of resistance that cannot be seen, but also cannot be taken. Freedom has become an abstract concept, a story told by travelers, not a reasonable expectation for your future. Yet complete submission is its own kind of death, one you're not yet ready to accept. Between these two impossibilities, outright rebellion and total surrender, you must navigate a narrow channel of resistance, just sufficient to maintain your sense of self. It begins with private thoughts. When the master calls you boy, though you're well past 30 winters, you respond dutifully while internally reciting your actual name. When the lady throws her soiled garments at your feet with disdain, you bow respectfully while imagining her struggling to dress herself without help. These silent rebellions leave no external trace, but preserve something essential within. You learn the art of malicious compliance, following orders precisely, but without the initiative that would make you truly valuable. Clean, the stable, becomes exactly that, just clean enough to avoid punishment, but not clean enough to merit notice or additional responsibilities. This calculated mediocrity is its own subtle weapon. Never be the best at anything, Agnes once whispered to you while sorting lentils in the kitchen. The best slave gets the most work, but never be the worst either. The worst gets the most beatings. Find the middle path where they neither notice nor discard you. Language becomes another battlefield of quiet resistance. You maintain your mother tongue in silent prayers before sleep. You deliberately misunderstand instructions that are insultingly delivered. I thought you wanted the brown horse saddled, not the black one, you say, with carefully crafted confusion, knowing this minor inconvenience will cost the steward precious minutes to correct. There are physical acts of defiance, so small they go undetected. The cook shows you how to spit in the master's soup, not enough to be noticed, just enough to know he consumes something of you without his consent or knowledge. You accidentally break a decorative plate the lady particularly cherishes. When scrubbing floors, you skip the corner beneath the cabinet that nobody sees. These tiny rebellions accumulate like raindrops, individually insignificant, collectively sustaining. More dangerous, but more satisfying, are the small thefts, not of valuable items that would trigger searches and severe punishment, but of experiences and moments. You steal minutes of rest by hiding in the hay loft. You pocket a handful of dried figs, not enough to be missed from the larder, but enough to remind your tongue that pleasure still exists. Most preciously, you steal knowledge, listening carefully when the master's children receive their lessons, mentally recording fragments of learning never intended for your possession. The master's youngest son is learning his letters, and sometimes leaves his writing materials unattended in the garden. During brief moments when you're certain no one watches, you practice forming letters in the dirt with a stick, quickly erasing the evidence. This forbidden literacy becomes your most treasured act of rebellion, for if they ever realized you could read the few words you've managed to piece together, the punishment would be severe. The nobility guards the written word jealously, understanding all too well that knowledge and power travel together. Fellow slaves become conspirators in this shadow resistance. You develop signals and code words to warn each other of approaching danger, or to coordinate minor sabotage. A particular whistle means the master is watching. A specific phrase about the weather actually communicates that extra food is hidden in the stable loft. This secret language binds you together in subtle conspiracy against your owners. Religious practice offers another avenue of spiritual autonomy. The master's Christianity demands your conversion and outward compliance, but in private moments, you might still whisper the prayers of your ancestors or maintain rituals from your homeland. Some slaves incorporate their original beliefs into their enforced Christianity, creating syncretic practices that satisfy external requirements while preserving internal traditions. Dreams become perhaps your most profound realm of freedom. In sleep, you walk unfettered through landscapes of your childhood. You speak as an equal to kings. You build impossible structures with your hands that belong only to you. These nighttime liberations sustain you through days of subjugation. Sometimes you deliberately revisit these dreams while awake, slipping into momentary reverie while your hands continue their assigned labor. The hardest test of your resistance comes when you're ordered to participate in the punishment of fellow slaves. The master, understanding that cruelty is most effective when it divides its victims against each other, occasionally demands that you hold down a friend, receiving lashes or report on the activities of your bunkmates. These moments force impossible choices between physical safety and moral survival. You develop strategies for these situations too. You hold your friend during punishment, but with a gentle grip that minimizes their pain. You report trivial infractions while concealing serious ones. You warn others when you've been questioned about their behavior. These compromises feel dirty, insufficient, but represent the bitter calculus of surviving with some fragment of your humanity intact. Your internal resistance finds unlikely allies. The village priest, though generally indifferent to your condition, occasionally speaks of God's vision of human equality, words intended as abstract theology, but which you collect and treasure as validation. The traveling bard whose songs speak of justice and the downfall of tyrants seems to meet your eyes during particular verses. Even the master's daughter, now approaching womanhood, sometimes questions her father about the treatment of our people in your hearing, though her concerns are quickly dismissed. Most significant in maintaining your humanity is the cultivation of beauty wherever possible. You notice the perfect symmetry of a spider's web in the stable corner. You arrange the kitchen herbs with subtle attention to their colors. You take the long path to the well because it passes the flowering apple trees. These appreciations cannot be detected or forbidden. The capacity to recognize beauty remains inalienably yours. Memory becomes both burden and salvation. The pain of remembering freedom is almost unbearable, yet deliberately recalling your past life becomes an act of defiance against a system trying to reduce you to an eternal, historyless present. Each night, you silently recite the names of your family members. You recall the layout of your childhood home, the smell of your mother's cooking, the weight of tools that once belonged to you. These memories, though painful, confirm that you once existed outside of bondage and might somehow exist beyond it again. What truly preserves your humanity, however, are the connections you maintain with others, not just fellow slaves, but all beings who suffer. You show kindness to the manor's cats, speaking gently to them when no humans observe. You secretly help the elderly slave who can no longer meet his work quotas. You leave a portion of your meager food for the wild birds that visit the courtyard. These acts of compassion, the voluntary recognition of another's needs, stand in direct defiance to a system that has attempted to reduce you to an object incapable of moral agency. The resistance takes physical toll. The energy required to maintain this double consciousness, outwardly compliant while inwardly autonomous, exhausts you beyond the already crushing physical demands. Some nights, you collapse onto your sleeping pallet too tired, even for dreams of freedom. The strain of constant vigilance, of monitoring every facial expression and word for acceptable submissiveness, creates its own kind of prison. There are moments when surrender seems easier. You watch those slaves who have fully capitulated, who have internalized their master's view of them as property, and notice they often suffer less. They receive better treatment, additional food, occasional indulgences. The temptation to join them pulls at you during your darkest hours, whispering that resistance only prolongs your suffering. But then you see Willem, his back still healing from the whipping, teaching a younger slave how to carve a tiny wooden bird, a skill from his homeland, a piece of cultural inheritance no master can confiscate. You watch Matilda humming her forbidden songs while the overseer is distracted. You notice how Agnes stands slightly straighter when addressing the cook than when addressing the master, a minute adjustment of posture that communicates volumes about her internal hierarchy of respect. These observations renew your commitment to this quiet rebellion. Total freedom remains beyond reach, but total subjugation remains your choice to refuse. Between these poles, you craft a narrow existence where resistance and survival intertwine, where each small defiance becomes a thread in the tapestry of your preserved humanity. Tomorrow will bring another day of commanded labor and enforced submission, but tonight, in the privacy of your thoughts, you remain unconquered. Freedom, the word itself, has become almost mystical in your mind, spoken in whispers among the slave quarters, its meaning growing more abstract with each passing season. 3 paths theoretically lead out of your bondage: escape, legal manumission, or death. You've witnessed slaves attempt all 3 with varying degrees of success. Escape remains the most tempting but treacherous option. As you feed the chickens near the manor's eastern wall, you sometimes catch yourself calculating distances. How far to the forest edge? How many days walk to the next county, where perhaps you might not be recognized? These mental measurements are automatic now, a perpetual background calculation that never quite resolves into action. The stories circulate among the slaves, tales of successful flights, to freedom that sustain hope like embers in nearly extinguished coals. There was Aldith, who supposedly fled during the chaos of a lightning-struck barn fire 5 summers ago. Some say she made it to the coast and worked passage on a merchant vessel. Others insist she was captured and now serves in a monastery 3 days' ride east. The truth remains elusive, but her memory inspires hushed conversations about what might be possible. More common are the failed attempts and their brutal consequences. Young Thomas tried running last autumn, making it nearly 2 days before the master's dogs tracked him through the marshlands. They brought him back bound to a horse, his feet bloody and face swollen from beatings. His punishment became a public spectacle, 20 lashes in the courtyard, followed by the application of salt to his wounds. Worse than these physical torments was the iron collar they welded around his neck, complete with bells that announce his every movement. 6 months later, he still wears it, its weight having permanently altered his posture. The problem isn't just getting away, Agnes explained once while you both sorted dried beans in the pantry. It's staying away. Where would you go? Who would take you in? Every stranger would see the rough hands, the haunted eyes, the way you flinch at loud voices. They'd know you for a runaway before you spoke a word. She's right. Medieval Europe offers remarkably few places for escaped slaves to disappear. Town guards check newcomers at city gates. Villagers report strangers to local authorities. Travelers without proper papers or explanations face immediate suspicion. The countryside between settlements offers temporary concealment, but no sustainable existence. Winter would claim any fugitive without shelter or provisions. Some slaves attempt escape with elaborate planning, hoarding food scraps for weeks, studying the movements of guards, memorizing routes to distant places described by traveling merchants. Others flee in moments of impulse or desperation, like the kitchen girl who simply ran into the forest during a violent beating, never to return. Whether her fate was freedom or death remains unknown, though you sometimes envy either outcome. Legal routes to freedom exist, but remain frustratingly rare. Manumission, the formal granting of freedom by a master, occasionally happens as a religious gesture, particularly when owners face their own mortality. Last Easter, the aging merchant from the neighboring estate freed 2 household slaves who had served him for 20 years, hoping this act might balance divine ledgers before his expected death. The ceremony in the village church granted them official documentation of their freedom, though without land or trade skills, their practical circumstances changed little. You've heard of slaves elsewhere purchasing their freedom, gradually accumulating small sums from extra work or minor trade until they could buy themselves. But your own master permits no such opportunities for independent earnings. Any coins that might come your way, the occasional penny tossed by a visitor, impressed with your stable work, or the tiny sum you earned helping the village smith during the harvest festival, must be carefully hidden. The sum required for self-purchase remains astronomically beyond reach. Rarely freedom comes through marriage. When the blacksmith's son took interest in Eliza, a house slave known for her skill with needlework, negotiations between the smith and your master resulted in her freedom in exchange for a new set of iron gates for the manor. Such arrangements require extraordinary circumstances. A free person willing to challenge social convention, a valuable skill the freed slave can contribute to their new household, and a master amenable to compensation rather than punishment. Religious intervention occasionally opens another narrow path. The Church officially disapproves of Christians enslaving fellow Christians, though this principle yields readily to economic reality. Still, individual priests sometimes negotiate freedom for particular slaves, especially those showing exceptional piety or useful skills for monastery work. The manor's former cook gained her freedom this way, trading one form of service for another, but improving her status and living conditions considerably. Then there is the third path, death, which you've seen slaves embrace both accidentally and deliberately. Old Roland, who worked the fields until his 70th year, simply lay down among the barley one hot afternoon and refused to rise again. The overseer's shouts and kicks produced no response. By sundown, he had departed this world of toil for whatever lies beyond. The master permitted a proper burial, acknowledging Roland's decades of service with the brief loan of a wooden coffin removed before the actual interment. More disturbing are the intentional departures. The young woman brought from distant lands, who spoke none of the local language, lasted barely a month before they found her hanging from a stable rafter. The field hand, who deliberately provoked the master's violent son during a drunken feast, practically inviting the sword thrust that ended his suffering. These desperate choices haunt the slave quarters, understood but rarely discussed directly. Your own thoughts have occasionally drifted toward this final escape, particularly during periods of intensified cruelty or hopelessness. The river that powers the mill looks peaceful from certain angles. The belladonna growing wild near the forest edge could provide a relatively gentle passage, but something always pulls you back, some stubborn attachment to breathing, to witnessing another sunrise, to discovering what might yet unfold in this imperfect existence. Formal emancipation remains exceedingly rare, especially in rural areas where traditional power structures face little challenge. You've heard rumors of Italian city-states where urban slavery has declined, of emerging legal restrictions on hereditary bondage in certain regions. But these distant developments hold little practical meaning for your daily reality. Here, under your master's jurisdiction, his will constitutes the only relevant law regarding your person. Freedom comes in stages, if it comes at all, Agnes told you once, during one of her philosophical moments. First, the mind must free itself from believing in its own subjugation. Then, the body might follow, if fortune permits. You've pondered her words often, wondering if your own mind has achieved this preliminary liberation, or if you remain enslaved in spirit as well as flesh. The most realistic path may be transfer to a different owner, not freedom exactly, but potentially improved conditions. When the master's cousin visited from the southern provinces, his evident approval of your horsemanship sparked brief hope that he might purchase your service. His reputation for treating slaves with minimal violence, even occasional dignity, made this prospect tantalizingly appealing. But nothing came of it. You remain where fate or misfortune originally placed you. Ironically, the closest taste of freedom often comes through temporary escape of duty, those rare moments when oversight lapses and you find yourself momentarily unsupervised. The precious quarter hour when you were sent to deliver a message to the mill and stopped by the stream, feet dangling in cool water, no eyes watching, no commands being issued. These stolen moments of autonomy become treasures carefully collected and revisited in memory during darker times. You've noticed that freedom exists on a spectrum, even among the legally free. The village peasants, who technically own themselves, still labor under crushing obligations to the local lord. The traveling tinker, who seems so wonderfully independent, must still beg permission to enter towns and practice his trade. The parish priest answers to his bishop, who answers to distant Rome. Even the master himself serves the whims of regional nobility and royal decree. This observation brings cold comfort, but some philosophical perspective. Most slaves you've known eventually adjust their expectations, transferring hopes for freedom to the next generation. Parents whisper to children about possible futures beyond bondage, though such talk must remain carefully guarded. Discovery of these aspirations invites not just punishment, but deliberate separation of families. Masters understand all too well the dangerous power of hope transmitted between generations. As you grow older, you increasingly measure freedom in small increments rather than absolute terms. The trusted position that allows occasional solitary errands, the skill level that grants some autonomy in how tasks are completed, the reputation for reliability that leads to less constant supervision. These minor expansions of personal agency don't constitute liberation, but they make existence somewhat more bearable. What you've come to realize, watching both slaves and free people over your years of service, is that true freedom requires more than mere legal status. It demands resources, skills, connections, and knowledge, all systematically denied to those in bondage. Without these supporting structures, even formally emancipated slaves often find themselves in circumstances barely distinguishable from their previous condition. Yet hope persists, stubborn as weeds in the garden you tend, perhaps because humans seem fundamentally unsuited to permanent captivity. Some essential quality within us resists complete domestication. You've watched the most broken slaves still find ways to assert their humanity through small choices, choosing which song to hum while working, which memory to revisit during quiet moments, which fellow bondsman to subtly assist when overseers aren't watching. As you finish your evening chores, spreading fresh straw in the stable stalls, you notice Willem showing a younger slave how to quickly identify the best pieces of straw to save for personal use, the softer bits that might make sleeping on hard ground marginally more comfortable. This tiny transmission of knowledge, this miniature rebellion against total deprivation, reminds you that paths toward freedom begin with such microscopic steps. Tonight, like every night, you will lie down on your pallet in the slave quarters, your body exhausted from labor that benefits others. You will listen to the breathing of your fellow bondsmen, some resigned, some still restless with dreams of escape. You will silently recite the names of those who achieved freedom through any of its three paths. And though experience has taught you to temper hope with brutal realism, some fundamental human spark within refuses complete surrender to circumstance. Tomorrow brings only more labor, more commands, more limitation. The paths to freedom remain vanishingly narrow, but as sleep finally claims your consciousness, that stubborn inner voice whispers that perhaps, through some combination of chance, cunning, and the mysterious workings of fate, you might someday count yourself among those rare few who discovered a fourth path, not yet imagined. The weight of history settles like a blanket, heavy, but somehow comforting in its solidity. The medieval slave, the modern listener, both part of humanity's long conversation with itself about freedom, dignity, and the meaning we create even within our constraints. Let your consciousness grow softer now, the boundaries between past and present blurring gently. The stone walls of the manor fade into the walls of your room. The rough wool of a slave's garment dissolves into the fabric against your skin. The distant sound of the manor bell melds with the quiet hum of your modern surroundings. The story remains with you, but its urgency recedes. Your breathing deepens as you drift toward that most democratic of human experiences, sleep, where earl and slave, ancient and modern, all surrender equally to the necessary restoration of consciousness. Rest now, knowing you've traveled far tonight, across centuries and back again, safe in your own time, your own place, your own freedom.